I'm Richard Porter, and this is Smith & Sniff's second show on the other side of things, in which I answer your questions this week, because Jonny's away. Yes, hello. I'm here on my own this week because Jonny is in Scotland doing an amazing barn find that he's very excited about, but he's too busy and or covered in swarfiga to be able to take part. So I'm manning the shop on my own. Sorry about that, but we have got lots of questions, so I'm just going to start ploughing into them and hopefully that'll be okay. The first one is from a listener called Sam, who's been greedy and sent in 4 questions. So I'm just going to answer maybe a couple of them. One of them, he says, Richard, can you tell us the story about your Range Rover selling/not selling? It is sold now, but the story's really, really long. I'll do it, I don't know, the next show or the one after that or something. I will tell you. It's not that interesting. It's just long and twisty and turny, but people do keep asking, so I promise I will share that one soon. And then Sam also asks, with the World of Top Gear exhibition at Bewley recently closing, do you have any idea what happened/is happening to the cars from the collection? I've seen some chat online that the BBC blocked any attempt to buy them and is having them all scrapped. I do know a little bit about this because I'll be honest, I didn't know that thing was closing down. It was set up years ago because we needed somewhere to put all these old cars that we'd bought or built on the show, and it was a sort of mutually agreeable arrangement for Bewley to develop this whole World of Top Gear exhibition because they thought, well, it'll draw punters in, and we had somewhere to stash these cars because it felt like it was a shame to throw them away. But they were living for quite a long time just in a sort of tatty yard at Dunsfold, and they were getting a bit algal and rusty, and so it was it worked for both sides. I gather in subsequent years the BBC suddenly went, hang on a minute, you're using the Top Gear name here, you should be paying us money. And I think that's probably why Bewley have decided to discontinue the exhibition, because it was costing them a lot just to license the name. What I'd heard on the grapevine is that somebody at the Beeb is now on top of this and doing their best to find homes for the cars, either as a collection or individually, put them in different places where they can still be seen or at least looked after. So no, as last I'd heard, which was only a couple of weeks ago, nothing is being scrapped, and somebody who actually cares about the history of these cars is doing their best to make sure that they're all taken care of. So I think things are okay there, but if I hear any more, I'll let you know. Moving on, Alex Reed says, I saw Jonny's Instagram story which had the picturesque Forton/Lancaster services in it. I live close by, so I'm very familiar with the iconic tower. This prompted a question in my mind. What do you two flutes think is the most interesting or best styled motorway services building? Well, I don't know. You're off to a flyer there, Alex, with the tower at Forton. I think it's called the Pennine Tower, isn't it? For people who don't know, it's very typical sort of brutalist concrete 60s styled thing that stands above, like a sort of, is it octagonal maybe? Shit concrete spaceship on a plinth that stands above the services, and it used to have a restaurant in it years ago, and then that was closed down. I think I read somewhere that it was then sort of used as a staff room or for staff training at the services, and now, last I've heard, it's just sort of used to store stuff, because someone that I know who has an office in Lancaster tried to rent it and wanted to make it their office. And they got into quite serious conversations, but they were ultimately told it wasn't safe or appropriate for them to base their business at that tower, even though that would be absolutely brilliant. Apart from anything else, you get amazing views. I think it's called the Pennine Tower because it gives you excellent views of the Pennines, but it's not to be. I can't think of anything that can beat that. I think it's brilliant, and I think the word iconic's overused, but it is kind of iconic. So that. But if you want just a pleasant services, I suppose that one Oxford on the M40 is quite nice because it's got a bit of a water feature, and you can't go wrong with the sort of general pleasantness of Gloucester services or what's that one they own up in the Lake District? The Same People. They're both nice. I don't think they're sort of architecturally significant. They're just pleasant. But otherwise, no. Forton and the Pennine Tower is probably about as interesting as it gets. Okay, so another question from Carl Hooper. Carl says, I currently own a 2012 Discovery 4 HSE. I know Jonny might not approve, but Richard may be so. It's the car that just does everything I need and does it very well. Room for 3 children, 2 large dogs, can take 7 adults if required, tow 3.5 tons and drive on all roads in all weathers, and looks classless in all places. I've had it for years and years, and I simply can't think what to replace it with. Carl's actually written years and years. I've never liked the Discovery 5, mainly because the boot is smaller and because of the horror stories with the earlier 3-litre diesel cranks exploding, and obviously its questionable looks. The Defender 110 has been looked at as a replacement. Love the looks and design, but the boot space is worse than the Disco 5, and the rear door is a no-no. In the Disco 4, you can sit on the tailgate and change shoes, etc. And you can't get captain's chair armrests. Is that right? I didn't know you couldn't get those on the Defender. Okay, well, fair enough. My point is, I loved the Jag hunting mule episode of the podcast by Richard, and it made me think about this and ask the question, do you guys have any intel on the look and features of the new Discovery? I want to replace my car. It's on 140,000 miles, and low mileage Disco 4s in the spec I like, no tints, etc., are getting increasingly hard to come by. I really just want Land Rover to make the next Discovery a super modernised Discovery 4 with all the features that I and many others love about these cars. Please, please, please let me know if you can help. This is a good point, because I was thinking about this the other day. There's quite a few Disco 4s kicking around my neck of the woods, and I saw a really late one last week, like on a 16 plate, and I just thought that's actually probably quite still valuable. And why doesn't Land Rover just start making them again? Because there's clearly a market. You can tell people like Carl don't get rid of them because they are just sort of right for what they need. I mean, he's obviously highlighted this. It's weird, isn't it? Discovery 5, the boot is smaller, and so it is on the Defender 110. And then the Defender 130 just looks like it's got some kind of diseased arse, because we were so used to seeing the 110s, and then the 130 came out, and you go, what's wrong? Why are the proportions strange? It's a huge car. I mean, I guess it solves the boot problem, but at the cost of being huge. And the 4 is not massive. But Carl, to answer your question, I don't have any intel. I've only got probably what you've also read from Autocar and people, which is that Land Rover insiders have been quoted as saying they've thought of a way to move the next Discovery away from the Defender, which seems to be stealing the Disco 5's lunch. So what that is, I have no idea. Honestly, we can speculate. I was actually nerding out over some old Land Rover stuff the other day, and early in the development cycle or development program of the original Disco, somebody, one of the designers in their studio, drew up a sort of off-road espace type thing, so kind of one box shape, much more of a people carrier, but still, I suppose, with Land Rover ability to drive across a field. And you think, well, I suppose they could do that. That would be different, but I'm not convinced that anyone really buys people carriers anymore because they buy SUVs. So I don't know, is the honest answer. No idea. Quite a challenge. I've thought about this. I thought, if it was up to you or me, what would you do? And I don't know. And the only thing I can think of is just remake the Discovery 4, stick a more modern infotainment in it, and then get it on sale, because it hasn't dated. I mean, if anything, it just looks better now because it's so sort of low-key and tasteful. And clearly all those rugby dads in gilets and yoga mums with a roll-up mat under their arm who drive those cars still, certainly around my neck of the woods, they agree. And they don't want something that's slightly more brash and with faux checker plate on it like the Defender. I don't know. Actually, on the note of my pathetic attempt to go Jag prototype hunting a couple of weeks ago in the main podcast, we forgot to mention in the last episode that, of course, Jaguar themselves released pictures of a camouflaged prototype on the track at Gaydon, almost as if they wanted to spite me because I couldn't see that car on the road. I have heard through the grapevine it's because they aren't on the road at the moment, and they are still at the stage where, for sort of technical reasons, the car has not been signed off, or the prototypes haven't been signed off for road use, so they're confined to the track at Gaydon and wherever else they might do their testing. But I guess now they've done official spy shots, in inverted commas, at least they can do road testing when the cars are signed off for it, because it's sucked the wind out of the sails of saddos like me who would try and take a photo of it driving down the B4100. Thanks to everyone who emailed in with pictures of that Jag prototype. I know, I've seen it. Also, I don't know if anyone saw the leak of what would have been the electric XJ, which was cancelled, 3 years ago. And then weirdly, in the same week that Jaguar teased its forthcoming big electric car, somebody stuck a photo, seemed to have been snatched in a workshop at Gaydon, of a mostly undisguised prototype of what would have been the XJ if they hadn't canned it. So it's all been secret, even after it was cancelled. And somehow someone had taken a really rubbish phone snap. And it's, I can't possibly say if I'd actually seen the finished thing, because I'm not allowed to say that. If I could say it, which I can't. But I will say that's a very unflattering photo of that car. It looked a lot better than that, I would imagine, if I'd seen it, which I haven't. Oh, actually, before I do another question, I just want to read something out, because it's a back ref to something we were talking about in the last Otosot. A listener asked us to nominate something we liked with a Rover V8 in it that wasn't strictly a Rover. And Jonny and I were talking about those old LDV Sherpas with the V8 in it. And I remembered that ambulances in London seemed to be LDV Sherpa V8s when I first moved here. An actual London ambulance driver, who's asked not to be named, has written in and said, listening to your latest Otosot and you talking about the Rover V8, I thought I would give you an insight into the LDV V8 ambulances. Back in the early 2000s, a very youthful and slightly less jaded and cynical me joined the London Ambulance Service. I can confirm that the fleet of ambulances were exclusively made up of LDV V8s with a laser body and mated to an automatic gearbox. They were absolute beasts to work with, but sounded great with that lovely V8 burble. Having the authority to plant your foot to the floor, often with the choke fully out, would create a howl not unlike a Vulcan bomber taking off. However, the sound of that V8 at full tilt did not equate to any speed being gained, as they were quite heavy with the weight of the body and equipment on board. They also had an eccentricity of, when being driven hard to an emergency and pulling up to the address, they would backfire loudly like a clown car, thus alerting the entire street of our arrival at 2 a.m. Equally, when working solo on a response car, you knew when the ambulance backing you up was arriving, because the rumble from the V8 would cause the patient's house to shake violently, often to the detriment of ornaments falling off mantelpieces. The earlier models with the flat front had steering wheels the size of a satellite dish, which, in the age before sat-navs, had the added bonus of being able to wedge a hardback copy of the London A to Z into it to aid navigation, a now lost skill. With such big steering wheels, they handled like a drunk camel on roller skates. In wet and icy conditions, they were lethal and would often result in unintended Tokyo drifts around Holland Park roundabouts. Also, the speedo needle would oscillate up and down wildly, meaning you just had to take an average to work out your actual speed. And they had a brake pedal so wide, it allowed you to plant both feet on it for maximum pressure, as the brakes were bum-squeakily useless with no ABS. They had several batteries fitted to power the auxiliaries, but on initial startup it would take time to build up enough power. This resulted in the siren clucking like a surprised chicken for the first quarter mile until the alternator provided enough juice, and the siren would then change to its intended yelp and wail sounds. One major advantage of having a big petrol V8 in a heavy vehicle, with the heater in the back of the ambulance also being petrol-driven, was that it drank like severely parched fish. In a busy 12-hour shift, it was not unheard of to have to fill the thing up twice. We had to use BP petrol stations for all fill-ups, and you could gain many fuel points that could be exchanged for things such as Argos vouchers. The points I gained in my first 2 years of service pretty much furnished my first flat. The change to the Mercedes Sprinters in the mid-2000s was like coming out of the dark ages. They were superior in almost every way to the LDV, but there was a delay in us getting them due to Mercedes developing a new automatic gearbox. I think UPS were also waiting for this at the time. This meant the LDVs had to soldier on way past their decommission date. It was not uncommon to be driving one that had large rust holes in the cab, often plugged with an incontinence pad. Most were scrapped at the end of their life of saving lives, which was surprising given how they handled. I would have expected many to have met their end, having been buried in the frontage of a Georgian townhouse. Some were sold off and converted into campers and burger vans. I'm not sure I'd want a burger with a side order of MRSA, though. There are a couple preserved in the service's heritage fleet, with lots of old hands regaling about how good they were. I think the passage of time has clouded their memories, as I thought they were blue-lighted turds. I guess a polite epitaph would be, they were character building. Keep up the good work with the podcast. CMTMB, the London Welsh paramedic. Thank you, sir or madam, for that. That's a fantastic recollection. I want to read that out in full because I just thought it was such a good sum up of those fantastic Sherpa ambulances. Anyway, we should go to a question. It's another Jag one by coincidence. It's from a listener called Daniel, who says, recently I've had a hankering to chop in my 20 model year Tesla Model 3 for something with a sweet, sweet exhaust note. I'm finding myself drawn to a Jaguar XK, the X150 shape. My question, is this a good idea or a complete financial liability? I've had one Jag before, an XE diesel with the shite Ingenium engine that was in Jaguar for repair much more frequently than actually on my drive. It might therefore take a bit of convincing at home that another Jaguar is a good idea. For context, we have a second uber-sensible car, a Dacia Duster bifuel that's used by my partner for his long commutes and for trips with our large, often muddy dog. Well, there you go. You see, Daniel, you've answered your own question immediately. Just get the Jag. Is it a good idea or a complete financial liability? Yes. These things can be the same. In fairness, now I know the X150 is a little bit later on, but that X308, the XJR Saloon that I had, I've said this quite a few times on the podcast before, it was pretty much good as gold in the years that I had it. I didn't ever have any problems, except it just needed new tyres, and what did I have to change on it? I can't remember now. Cam chain followers, possibly? Because there was some issue with them, and it wasn't that they failed, but you were just advised to sort them before they did, because they were plastic and not very durable. But otherwise, it was genuinely good as gold. I think probably some old Jag's reputation for being a bit flaky is not necessarily deserved. And the X150 is still sort of some residual Fordiness maybe in there, which seemed to be where a lot of the not quite as shit as they used to be qualities came from in Jags. So, yeah, why not? I mean, you've got another car, tick. They are temptingly priced now, those X150s. They do sound nice, and that seems to be the main thing that Daniel's looking for. I can't think of a reason not to, apart from potential financial ruin. But honestly, get one that's got decent history, that's being sold, if it's private, by somebody who seems like a decent sort, and why not? Since we're doing car buying as well, another listener, Pete, has said, next year I shall be turning 40 and wish to complete the male stereotype of midlife crisis by thickening at the waist, thinning on top, and buying a sports car. Practicality isn't too much of a consideration, as most of my commuting is done on the train, and we have an F31 330D for general long trips and holiday duties. Again, you see, you have another car. This is liberating. You can do something stupid if you want to. In this case, Pete says, I'm considering an E36 M3, a Z4M Coupe, or a Porsche Cayman S, all of which can be found in budget. I've also looked at 996 and 997 911s, but these tend to be a little more ropey at this price, but they feel like a cut above in terms of a performance car. Any guidance from you gents as to which vehicle I should purchase to maximise my potential as an ageing, fat, balding man? Pete, I think go big or go home. You might as well go full 911, but I take your point that they might be a bit more ropey. You haven't said what your price point is, but what I would say is that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Jonny sent me a message in a state of high excitement because there was a 911 up for auction online, and it wasn't just any 911. It was a 997 Carrera manual, so lovely in itself, but it was macadamia, that brown colour, with a brown leather interior. It was a superb spec, and right up Jonny's street, right up my street, truth be told. And we both went, oh, if only. But neither of us really felt in the position to bid on it, thinking it would probably go for chunky-ish money. And actually, from memory, I think it sold for 26 grand. And it was a 997 Gen 2 as well. So that felt cheap. And I think it's probably indicative of the fact that at the moment, the car market's not particularly buoyant. It is the cliched buyer's market. So, Pete, what I would say is, if you do a bit of snouting around, there is a chance that perhaps an unropey 911 might fall within your budget. If not, E46 M3, yes, but there's been so many have been knobbed with or treated badly. Z4M Coupe, I think that's quite an underrated car. Be tempted by that. And the Cayman S, I mean, Cayman S is lovely. Get a Cayman S, you'd probably be happy all the day long. And there may just be a tiny thing in the back of your head. I went, should have gone full 911. There's a tiny bit more depth of character to a 911, but it's not that great. And if you're not comparing them back to back, you'd never notice. Caymans are lovely. So, but if your hair is thinning, why not accelerate all of those hairs leaving the top of your head by getting a soft top and going for a Boxster instead? There's probably more to choose from. But I don't know, it sounds like you're more of a coupe guy. Anyway, I hope that's been some use. Probably not. Thomas Howarth from Horsepower Hunters has written in. This is another Top Gear question. He says, please could you explain exactly the relationship between Top Gear the show and Top Gear magazine while they were both active? I don't ever recall a mention of the magazine on the show, which seems strange, as one would imagine it could have been a very effective way of marketing it. Well, there's a very simple reason for that. It's because, not to get too boring, but at that point there was the BBC, as in the public service paid for by the British public paying their television licence fee. And there was what was called BBC Worldwide at that point, the commercial part, the one that was allowed to sell magazines in shops for cash money, also did the, packaged up DVDs and stuff, and did everything that was more like a proper business rather than a public service broadcaster. And although they were sort of part of the same thing, and there was this special relationship between two, it was always very strictly policed because the telly bit was public service and the other side was commercial. So we were not allowed to mention Top Gear magazine on Top Gear the show. We had to be very careful about that. Even to the extent, I think when we did that stupid electric car, the Hammerhead Eagle Eye Thrust thing, or Jeff as it was also called, and then we wanted some proper car magazine road testers to write it up, we couldn't go to our friends at Top Gear magazine, who we knew full well, because we'd get a bollocking from the BBC grown-ups for promoting what was effectively a BBC product. That wasn't allowed. It was weird and very complicated, because I'm sure when Top Gear was on a Thursday night, they used to mention the magazine like at the end of the show or something, but maybe that the rules changed. I forget. So yeah, we had to get Autocar to test the Hammer Eagle Eye Head Thrust, whatever it was called, and that was partly because of that rule. So yeah, it was very deliberately not mentioned. It wasn't because we were crap at marketing, although we probably also were. The other way around, as in the mag mentioning the show, that was fine, because they were a commercial enterprise. They were allowed to do what they wanted. So when we had a new series coming up, the magazine would usually do quite an extensive feature about what was coming up in the new series. That was okay, but we couldn't ever mention the mag in any meaningful way. So that's why. Moving on, this isn't a question again, this is just a message from a listener called Ben Williams. He says, after listening to Otosot 26, I couldn't help but email in regarding the question of a bird piercing Richard's temple through the dropped window of a moving car. As you said, physically possible, but highly unlikely, or so we thought. A friend of mine was travelling New Zealand working for agricultural contractors hauling silage. Driving a rigid lorry full of grass, window down, arm resting on the door, he drove past a golf course. On the fairway was the groundsman with a gang mower, blissfully unaware that he had driven over a stray golf ball. The cylinder blade on the mower flicked the ball into the air, and you guessed it, right through the open window of the lorry, only to hit the driver in the face and knock out 4 of his front teeth. Unbelievable, I know, but 100% true. Ben. Right, now, yes, obviously, I'm not denying that this is true. It's amazing, but here's my theory. A ball that's been powered by a mower has a weight and a momentum to it that a bird doesn't. A bird is self-powered and it's lighter than a ball, or it's less dense than a ball. I failed physics at school, so I'm not explaining this very well, but I think a bird, by dint of a bird being feathery, is designed to ride air and use it to its advantage. But I think with the boundary layer of air that I imagine is rushing past a moving lorry or car, that's going to have an effect on the bird's feathers and slow it down. The ball is designed to fly through the air. I think that's why they're dimpled, isn't it? So it's not going to be so affected by a cross stream of air. It'll still cut through it because that's what it's supposed to do. Does that make any sense? Probably not. It's times like this when I wish Jonny was here to tell me that I'm talking shite. But sadly he's not. Another message, sorry, this is not a question either, but it is a backref to the last Otosot. When we were talking about things with Rover V8s that aren't Rovers, I landed on the Wolfrace Sonic, a one-off concept car that the wheelmaker made to promote some new alloys. And Jonny said he thought that it still exists, but he wasn't sure. We've had an anonymous message from a listener who confirms that it does still exist. In fact, it's in the midst of a long, ongoing restoration, but the chassis has been powder coated. It's getting modern electrics. The bodywork has been fixed up, and it's now being put back together. So I don't know if we'll get to see it in public once that's done, but the Sonic still exists. The Sonic is being sorted out. So thank you, anonymous tip-off merchant there, for letting us know that. All right, one last question. It's from a listener calling themselves Sticky. This is another Top Gear one. I thought I'd just mop up a few Top Gear things while I'm doing this on my own. This listener says, having said farewell to Clarkson et al., I decided to start rewatching every Clarkson, Hammond and May era Top Gear again from the beginning. An easy task because they're all available on BBC iPlayer. Although I have suspicions that some sections have been removed / edited / replaced, but that's for another time. Really? I don't know. I mean, it might be that they're using a different edit that existed back in the day because of time reasons or something like that, or music licensing. There are other reasons. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a conspiracy. It might just be that there were always different versions of the show for different outlets. Anyway, Sticky says, my main question, based on my observations of the audience evolving throughout the first few years, is this. Did the production team employ a totty wrangler, in inverted commas, to marshal the best-looking females present on the day into prime positions for the camera? It's especially noticeable during the news and the star and a reasonably priced car segments. This has long been my suspicion, but confirmation would be nice. Well, Sticky, that's a hell of an accusation, and the answer is yes. I mean, no, there wasn't a specific person in that role. We had a floor manager and other people on the studio floor to move the audience around. That's just normal in a show like that where it's, everyone's standing up and they're required to move about to different areas of the studio. But what we realised very quickly is that often the people who wanted to be at the front were the people you didn't want to be at the front because they were often blokes in Subaru branded fleeces and they would stand there chewing gum or with their mouths hanging open. But then we realised as well that probably if you're watching it at home, particularly because you've only got Jeremy, Richard and James to look at, and they're not all taken from the oil painting department anyway, it might be better to put some reasonably attractive people in the back of shots. So it was quite cynically done. Just it is probably a more enjoyable viewing experience if you're not distracted by somebody who chews gum and doesn't laugh along. So yeah, we were quite ruthless about trying to find people who would work in the back of shot. I don't know if we've ever admitted that before, but there we go. I've done it now. It's all in the past. Thanks for your questions, Sticky. Thanks to everybody for questions and messages about things we've talked about previously on this show. Back again on Monday with a normal show with Jonny, and then we'll do another Otosot on Friday. In between that, on Thursday, we are at the Mini Factory in Oxford. As I'm saying this, we have some tickets available. Next month's show in County Durham is sold out, but I think you might just be able to get the tickets to the mini show on Thursday the 28th. So hopefully see some of you there. Thank you for putting up with me on my own, and see you on Monday. Goodbye.